Alright, before we get to the two books which I've tied for first place, let me give you 3 honorable mentions. The Red Pyramid by Mr. Rick Riordan. First book I ever read of his, adored it. Not as good as some of his other works though, now that I've read them. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It's a classic by Robert Louis Stevenson, Study into Good and Evil. Love it. It's interesting. Read it. Last Thing I Remember by Andrew Clavin. The only other Christian book I've mentioned in this. It's got a lot of flaws, especially concerning a little over-emphasis on patriotism. It's a little bit too black and white, but I put it in there because I adored the sci-fi aspect of it and the idea, namely, of waking up one day and you can't remember a whole year of your life, and you went from being a normal school kid to being a prisoner by a terrorist organization. You can't remember a year of your life. It's worth reading. Read it. It's an honorable mention. All of these 3, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, Red Pyramid, Last Thing I Remember, are worth reading, but none of them were quite good enough to make the list. So without further ado, my top 2 favorite books are... Drumroll. Alright, my top favorite books on my list, these both tied for number 1, I love them just as much, are The Hobbit by Jrr Tolkien and The Horse and His Boy by C.S. Lewis. First, I'll talk about The Hobbit. The Hobbit is the classic questing story about a hobbit who does not want to leave his environment. But what is a hobbit? After all, we don't see too many of them around anymore, and they're very shy of the big folk. Hobbit is simply a small person. They live in holes in the ground, and they live very simple, agricultural, sweet lives. Very, very nice lives, though. And I always wanted to be one when I was a kid. I loved hobbits. But this hobbit, Bilbo Baggins, is a very uptight, simple hobbit who doesn't want to go on any quests. His family is very respectable, very simple. And Gandalf gives him a push out of the door. And so he runs along without a cloak or a pack or a spare handkerchief. And he goes on this quest with these dwarves, sent by Gandalf. And if you even know a quarter of what I've heard of him, and mind you, I haven't heard very much of him myself, you would know that this character is awesome. Gandalf is awesome, and the story is great. They're going on this quest to reclaim gold from the dragon Smaug, and it's just nuts what they have to go through, and you should read it. It's good. It's one of the best. If you like questing stories, questing, fanciful, fairy tale-like stories, you will love The Hobbit. I give it a higher rating than Jrr Tolkien's more famous work, Lord of the Rings, only because it is more connected. I find it an easier read. I felt that he left out what was unnecessary, put in what was. The only caveat to that is I felt rather insulted that it was originally considered a book for little children. I couldn't read it until I was not a little child anymore. It was too hard. So that says something about what people in Tolkien's day were like versus people nowadays. The other book in my list is, my other top favorite book is The Horse and His Boy by C.S. Lewis. I love Narnia. It's part of the Narnia series, but it is just so unique as part of the series. It's the only book where I feel if you could only read one Narnia book, this should be the book. This, because it is so unique. It is basically a Narnian and Archenlandish myth from the days of Narnia. It has nothing to do with the wider story. It's all a story from Narnia itself. It's a story that takes place entirely within the world of Narnia. From the main characters are all Narnian natives, and we're seeing for the first time or this idea of what the world of Narnia is like. And it's so fascinating. We start in one of the most this world-like countries ever, Calormen. And it's a young man named Shasta's journey to escape from slavery along with a talking Narnian horse Bree who's been captured, and his journey to make it to the free land of Narnia. Calormen is the most Earth-like country in Narnia, or in the Narnian world, and it is so fascinating. The culture and all of this, and then the culture clash when they get to Narnia. It is so great. Read the story. Just if you don't want to read any other Narnia story, read The Horse and His Boy. I'll guarantee you, you will understand Narnia from the best point of view possible. That of a native of that world. What could be better than that, huh? So that about wraps that up. You now have seen what I like, my top favorite books, my top 10 plus the honorable mentions. You can really tell a lot about a person by what books they're interested in, I think. And you can see mine. A lot of them have very strong fandoms, but a lot of them are not quite as famous. So I think that you should read all of these. If you don't want to read any other fiction books ever, then you should read these. But still, this is all my opinion, and a lot of people go for different styles of books. Darker and grittier books a lot of people go for, and I don't go for those so much. I've never enjoyed them. I've read a few, don't get me wrong. I mean, I read the darker stuff by Decker. I've read Game of Thrones. I read The Hunger Games. I enjoyed The Hunger Games to an extent, but not enough to make it to this list. And a couple of others. Couple of murder mysteries, you know, stuff like that. And you know, those books are okay. Except for Game of Thrones. I don't think a Christian should read those books. But other than that, most of them are okay. But that's just not what my interest is. My interest is for the more lighthearted and fantastical stuff, and so that's the stories I read. So, you may be thinking to yourself, well, David, a few times in this video you've said you were a Christian. And you've mentioned in other videos you're a Christian. If you're a Christian, why isn't the Bible on your top 10 favorite books? My answer to that is simple. This was my top 10 fiction books. God bless.